Hi everyone, welcome to lecture 1B. In this lecture we're going to be looking at part of chapter 2 in your textbook, Site Management. A lot on the different sort of organizational structures, the way different construction companies organize themselves for a particular project. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be talking about the traditional delivery system and the relative roles that people play. There's a lot of different organizational structures dependent on how companies want to run their projects. Also, a big part of it in the construction industry is what type of contract are we using. There's numerous different types of contracts that are used in construction projects, as you'll see. And to be honest, there's a lot of hybrids in the different types of contracts as well. So you'll see a lot of different forms out there and different roles and responsibilities between contractors, subcontractors, consultants, and owners, and the way that each party organizes themselves, to be quite honest with you. Some have like a matrix type organization. There can be formal and informal contractual relationships between the participants. Sometimes you might be going with a cost plus different type of relationship, sometimes referred to as time and materials, but they are somewhat different. Standard contractual forms that are used. For example, in Canada, we typically use CCDC contracts. There's a number of different types of CCDC Construction Documents Committee. So it's Canadian Construction Documents Committee. So for example, CCDC2, that's a lump sum contract, probably the most common one that you will find. And actually that organization, the committee is formed representing many parts of the construction industry. Consultants, the Canadian Construction Association was heavily involved in development of those contracts. So you've got a lot of the different parties represented on those committees. And what they're trying to do is come up with a representative contract in each area that would be fair, that would be binding, that would stand up to Canadian law. And indeed, because they're standardized in Canada and they've been vetted and they've been brought to court many times and adjusted, they do represent a well-developed contract system. So some of the different types of contracts that you'll see, most common, as I mentioned, lump sum or design bid build. In a design bid build, the project is designed, then it's bid on, and then it's built. And so when you're competing for a lump sum contract, it means that there's been designs completed and they've been put out for bid. Then companies go in, they use the term pursuit. You're in pursuit of this particular project. And so it's advertised. Contractors that can get pre-qualified to bid on the project. Pre-qualification typically entails a bunch of elements such as making sure that you're financially stable. Have you done similar projects of this type before? How busy are you right now? What is your bonding capability to be able to come up with a bid bond, a performance bond, etc. on this project? A bid bond ensures that people bidding on the project are serious about it. So for example, if there's $100 million project, you might have a $10 million bid bond, 10% of the project. So if you're off on your bid, you could potentially lose that $10 million bid bond if you didn't follow through with the contract. So you have to take it very seriously in those cases. Many government projects are that way. The primary contractual parties, owner, architect, and contractor. Typically for a lump sum project, the contract is going to be between the owner and the contractor. So whoever the client is and the contractor. Very often the consultant, architect, will be the one that is looking after the owner's interest to ensure that the project gets built the way it was designed. And they're ensuring progress payments, they're inspecting the work as it goes along, they're looking at submittals, they're looking at mock-ups, they're doing a whole bunch of things to protect the owner's interest and to ensure that the design and specifications are built the way that they are intended. So neither the architect nor contractor does 100% of the work that's assigned. Obviously, each makes an agreement with others involved to accomplish specific areas of the work, depending on what is being done. If I'm coming up with the design, the architect may have structural engineers that work on the design for them. They may have specialty designers that they hire for this process. They may be involved in hiring other inspection agencies or specification writers. There could be a whole bunch of people that they'd be involved with in the design process. Contractors, on the other hand, they're going to typically not self-perform all the work. They're going to hire subcontractors and many suppliers, etc. So traditional delivery system kind of looks like this. You've got the owner. The architect has a contract with the owner, and the contractor has a contract with the owner. The architect oversees the work of the contractor to ensure that it's being done, and they have their own consultants, and contractors have their own subcontractors. Likely you're looking at about 90% plus of the work is being done by subcontractors for the contractor. It depends if they're self-performing some of the major structural work or not. So there's those contractual relationships that you will see. Methods of compensation with different project delivery systems. We can have a lump sum contract, as we were just talking about. And so the lump sum contract is one fee for doing the complete project. Could also be cost plus a fee. So in a case of a cost plus a fee, you're putting a percentage on top of what the direct costs of doing the work are. So that usually comes into play when the work is very complex, or you don't have time to have a complete set of drawings, so it doesn't make sense to then have a traditional lump sum contract. People, let's face it, when you go to buy something, think about it, you like to know what it's going to cost ahead of time. So people tend to like that, and that's why the lump sum is still the most popular type of contract. However, that's often a mistake, because if you haven't really done your due diligence, you've rushed the design process, and you're getting quotes on a project, and then you're going to make a whole pile of changes later on. Yeah, probably would have been better with like a cost plus or a different arrangement, because lump sum, well, you have this fixed price, but you keep changing everything. So now the contractor's putting all these changes and extra costs, and they can keep, padding those costs. They could do other things. Likely it would have been better with just a cost plus, and then you got this fixed fee and you're monitoring it as it's going happening, and you can say, I want to see the receipts with a cost plus, so the base cost is understood, and then you're just paying for a management fee and profit and overhead on top of that. So it depends on the project, and it depends on the complexity of the project, depends on how complete the design information is to determine what's the best type of contract. So just because lump sum is the most popular, although recent years it's been lessening because there is so much complexity and there are so many changes, it's not necessarily the best type of contract. Cost plus with a guaranteed maximum price has also advantages. We'll talk about that. And unit price contracts. So these are some other types. Responsibility of the contractual parties. All right, so the owner's paying for the work and project coordination from their own perspective, not from the details of how a GC is going to manage it. Site, scope, and documents. The architect, project design, construction documents, drawings, specifications, contract. And the contractor, labor, materials, equipment, expertise, and the means to complete the project. The contractor is the one that knows how to build the project. The contractor is the one that has all the contacts in place and the relationships built with subcontractors, suppliers, etc. So a big part of that role falls on the contractor from that perspective, but they have to work very closely with the other parties. So the owner's role during the construction project is typically, well, they've got to worry about that they budgeted enough for this project. They have to be able to handle changes and facilitate that process as they come up. And they also have to, typically, if it's a project of any kind of size, they're going to have their own project manager for the owner. And that's usually somebody that's hired on to look after the owner's interests from the owner's perspective, and they're working directly for the owner. They're an employee of the owner typically. They may have their own inspectors and testing agency, usually like commissioning process. Commissioning is to test the project and make sure that everything is operating the way it was designed. Our building systems are very complex. We have integrated building automation systems, and we have to make sure that life safety systems and heating ventilation systems, communication systems are designed and actually working the way they were designed. So usually the owner will be hiring a third-party test and commissioning agent that will oversee that work. And how complex that is depends on the project. You know, if it's a hospital, it's very complex. If it's a college, it's reasonably complex. If it's a warehouse, it might not be so complex. So the architect's role during the construction process, essentially from the architect's team, this is looking at something like a stand tech, if you will, principal in charge who's going to be overseeing the work. So what's the architectural firm? Who does the project manager report to? It's usually a principal in charge type position. It could be, you know, a senior project manager. It could be somebody that's looking after a portfolio of projects. And then you have the individual project manager. So who's responsible for this project, and the project architect. So who's doing the actual designs, the consultants, their contract administrator, specialty coordinators, etc. It may look something like this. The point is there's going to be a lot of integration even from the architectural side. You know, if I'm doing a renovation or a house design, you're talking to an architect and they're the chief cook and bottle washer. It's different when you get into large projects. We get into this aspect that nobody knows everything, and this is how how the architectural firm will deal with those instances. So from the contractor's role during the construction phase, we have, you know, the officer in charge. We have scheduling. We have our PM in this organizational chart. They can be different. Estimating department usually has estimating crew. They may assign an estimator to the project to handle all the change orders, that sort of thing. Scheduling, if it's a big enough company, they will have their own scheduling department that helps to ensure that the schedules are well developed, properly developed, able to collect the data, able to be properly managed and updated, and recoveries, and assist in those areas. And the PM is obviously going to be working with the scheduling department. They're also going to be working with estimating. And in this particular hierarchy, so the superintendent would report to the project manager. I find more and more often the superintendent is independent, like they are not a sub role to the project manager, but more traditionally they were. Project engineer, field engineers, foremen, subcontractors. So this would be the foreman if you're self-performing the work. Subcontractors, then they have their own foreman. Foreman is like a lead plumber, a lead electrician, a lead forming supervisor. So that's how that comes in. Second tier subcontractors are people that subcontract to subcontractors, and then they can have their own foreman, etc., and craftspeople. So the list kind of goes on. Important to see, though, that on the project, the coordination of the actual site is flowing through the site superintendent, Well, the communication, quite honestly, and this is just showing you an internal chart, the communication with the client and owner is usually taking place, and the architectural firm is usually taking place through the PM. This is, as I said, what I see as a more common kind of format. So this could be like a construction manager that looks after a portfolio of projects for the company. They may have an operations officer that actually flows through them as well. You've got a superintendent, head of the site supervision that's taking place, project manager, project engineer, field engineers. Again, there's crossover effects that are taking place, foremen, subcontractors, and then this is all the same like the last slide. Other roles that you see, well, obviously there's the regulatory roles, building inspectors, plumbing inspectors, electrical, all the different life safety systems, building code systems, regulatory authorities, Ministry of Labor, etc. that get involved with these areas. And communications, as I was saying, you can kind of get the sense of communications that might take place between the consultants and the contractors, but you'll usually find that the main flow that is going to be flowing through from the architectural firm is going to be going through the PM, and then you'll have cross sort of synergies going with the site superintendent occasionally, and occasionally with subcontractors and subconsultants. So if they've got a sub-mechanical engineering firm doing a design and there's a subcontractor, an RFI might be going through them. It might originally go to the architect who places it to them, or it goes directly to them and they're CC'd on it. So we have our construction management delivery system applied early in the project, more tools and controls, forms of construction management, agency construction managers, CM at risk, CMGC, there's all these variations of contract delivery systems. And we'll talk about construction management. Guaranteed maximum price usually happens where you may start a project as a cost plus early stages. Maybe you're starting as a design build, and then once the design is complete, the owner wants some stability in the cost, and you've got everything clearly figured out. Then you might go roll it into what they call a guaranteed maximum price. And a guaranteed maximum price contract essentially says that you share in the profits. So you give a guaranteed maximum price, say $10 million. And if you're able to do the project for say $9 million, then the owner would save $500,000 and you would save $500,000. You would get $500,000. So the savings you split. So there's an incentive for you to come under the guaranteed maximum price from that perspective. It's less risky than a lump sum. That's some of the advantages of a guaranteed maximum price to the contractor, and to the owner, it gives them an opportunity, if they haven't got the full design, if the project's being fast-tracked, to sort of clamp it down at a certain stage when the designs are completed. The one type of contract, a lump sum, you do all the design, all the specification, really do it detailed ahead of time when you do it well. Then you put it out for bid, then you get your prices in, and then you build it. Problem is, we want to get the shovels in the ground, and if we can, for example, have the preliminary designs done, have the full foundation designs complete, get a building permit approval for the substructure, be able to move ahead on that work while the rest of the drawings are being completed, then that allows work to be done while the drawings are being completed. That shortens up the time schedule. And that's a big deal. Time is a really big deal in the real world. We need these things now. We want them now. Everybody wants things quicker. So this is some of the challenges. But is there some risk with that? Yes. Is there a lot more changes typically in those types of projects? Yes. If in a perfect world, could we do a design and lay everything out? That would be wonderful, but that's not necessarily the way the world works. So owners, construction manager, architects, contracts. So under a construction management contract, the owner hires a construction manager. Let's face it, somebody that's been in the construction industry working usually as a GC has a lot of contacts, fully knows how things are built, right? And they know how things are built better than an architect. So who better than to monitor the contractors doing the work than a construction manager? And then if the owner's hiring them based on a percentage of what the contract costs, maybe with a guaranteed maximum price built into it, then essentially that construction manager is not at risk the way they are in a lump sum. On a lump sum, your contractor, as I mentioned earlier, you make a mistake, it could cost you the company. I work with a lot of big companies, and every one, they have their projects. No, this project's lost $30 million. This project lost $40 million. It's a burden when you have these projects that lose those large amounts of money. It really takes away from all these other winners they have, which they do have winners, but it is a burden when you miscalculate and you get yourself in those traps. So a lot of them really enjoy and like to gather a certain amount of their projects to reduce their risk in a construction management framework. So that's that CM agency or not at risk aspect. So you see the dashed line. So they're managing all of these contractors for the owners. They're managing the contracts. They're managing the progress payments, etc. So you got your PM, design manager, contract administrator, construction superintendent, field engineer, just to give you sort of a layout of the land. You don't see self-performing of the work, right? And so construction manager, project manager, design manager, and then the contractor is a separate entity. And they are being paid by the owner, right? Approvals and progress payments and inspections, they're all being done by, and scheduling is all being done by the construction manager. Design build. The advantage, a lot of advantages, like I was mentioning earlier, is that you can start to design it and then build it at the same time. You also, if it's the GC that is managing the project, so on a design build, they could have the architectural team in-house, but more times than not, they're going to partner with a architectural firm. So on big projects, they'll partner with a big architectural firm, and then they'll collaborate and they'll work together. It's not so adversarial, right? They're working directly with the client then, and the architectural firm, they're working with them to do the design. So it's not like the architectural firm is acting in the owner's interests in that case. It's interesting because I talked to, when I was doing some work out in Alberta, I mentioned to one of the groups that I was doing, so as far as working with an architectural firm, who do you, because there was a lot of bashing going on with about some of the architectural firms. And it was interesting, one of the project managers said, well, this firm's great to work with, they're wonderful to work with. And the other one said, they're the worst one to work with. And so then when I started digging into questions, yeah, they were wonderful to work with when it's a design build and you're like partners or they're your client. It's not so good to work with them when they're representing the owner's interests because they're trying to protect the owner's interests, right? So they're doing their job. So contract relationships means a lot in how you actually work together very often and whose responsibilities you're trying to protect and what risks that you've taken on. So you should keep that in mind with regards to contracts and contract types. It really does change sort of things. So you have the owner in a design build firm, you got the architect, contractor, and again, design build firm. Sometimes they even form a firm to represent the company. So in this case, we've got design build firm, designers, constructors. So you just got the whole company built into it. And here we've got the design firm, we've got the architectural firm with their consultants and contractor, but we're working collaboratively with a contract to the owner. So the contract to the owner is basically with this design build firm. P3 projects kind of work in that sense too, where they form a partnership, they form an entity, private-public partnerships, where you have maybe you have a engineering firm, maybe you have a tunneling firm, maybe you have the construction firm. So I guess a good example would be Crosslinks. So the Eglinton Crosstown LRT. That's a consortium built, I believe, sometimes I get it mixed up, of SNC Lavalin, Ellis Don, and Dragados, I believe. So Dragados is a huge tunneling company out of Spain that's been doing a lot of work in Canada with all the LRTs that we've been doing. Design build, it's all different organizations. I'm going to let you read in the text in a little bit more detail about the explanation of the different relationships. What you should know is, though, that they can be somewhat different in different ways, shapes, and forms. This is almost here like a integrated IPD, integrated project delivery system, that they're calling design build organization 4, where everybody partners up and everybody shares in the profit. So again, communications can be somewhat different depending on which of those structures that you have. You have the owner's representative, usually the PM we mentioned, for working for the owner, their employee, talking to or communicating directly through the project manager for the project. And then you've got on the design side and on the construction side and subcontractors, right? So again, it can have a structure somewhat like that. Also, all of this depends on scale of the types of projects. If we're talking about $2 billion projects, it's going to be really sort of a hierarchy in different levels because it's going to require a lot of people. If we're talking about, a $5 million project, it's going to be much more lean and mean, so to speak. EPC, this is really where you see heavy industrial plants, power plants, refineries, etc. Some companies like Bird Construction, they do a lot of work with oil refineries like in Alberta. They might also do some very heavy civil type projects too. And those types of companies that do that section of work typically self-perform most of the work. So they design it, they perform it. So a lot of direct contracts on that. And they're very large, heavy industrial projects, very closely monitored, very litigious type of work often in the different areas. So you have to be really on point with keeping and collecting your data. But it can be a very sort of profitable area as well. So there are a lot of different systems. These would probably be the most popular ones that you will see right now. P3s are popular in very large scale projects, as I mentioned, and ones that are coming into being are what we call integrated project delivery systems, where there's a sharing of the profit between the clients, the designers, and the prime subcontractors and contractors. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the lean construction side later in the course. Each has its role to play, and each suits certain parts of the work frame. So keep that in mind as well. There's a right situation for a right contract. It doesn't always work that way. Very often the wrong contract is used, and I can give you lots of examples of that. But ideally, the client, if they're advised properly and they listen, they should be getting the contract type that will work best for their particular project and their time frame. Time, cost, plus quality, these all integrate like we mentioned in lecture 1A. And this helps to determine what's the best contract type. If I got lots of time, do I need to fast track this project? We can probably take our time and do a pretty good design and tender it out for a lump sum. On the other hand, if it's very complex, that might not be the best solution, because then we're going to be doing a million change orders. So we've got to look at those kind of things and make the best choice. Even as much as owners want lump sum, there are often those types of choices. So that's what I wanted to cover in number 1B. And hopefully that's given you a sense of contract relationships. I would strongly advise you to go through that chapter in the book, chapters 1 and chapters 2, as there's a lot of information in there. And I know in your particular area you haven't had too much background in this from previous experience teaching this course, so it's worth your while, because it's going to come up everywhere, not just in this course, in all your future courses as well. And it gives you, missing that link of how these different contract types work or not seeing it exactly can leave a bit of a void for you. So Tom Stevenson signing off, and have a wonderful day and evening. Bye for now.